is to help solve the climate crisis and restore climate health. So that is what drives me every single morning, and sometimes to the point of feeling down, to be honest about it. I tend to be an optimistic person, but in the area of climate, it's hard to feel optimistic. And what I do with that energy is just work on it, and use prayer, and enjoy walking, bicycling, and driving my EV, and being at sessions like this where we have a whole bunch of people. And certainly my work at Presidio Graduate School helps me to be with other people who feel equally passionate. I won't ascribe the word desperate to others. Sometimes I feel that way, honestly, but for people who are keenly engaged. So thank you.
Thank you, Pam. That's wonderful. And Nancy, would you like to go next?
So how do I feel about the climate crisis? I would say the two words that most accurately describe my feelings are frustrated and angry. And I say that because it's been about 150 years ago that scientists first theorized that fossil fuels could lead to atmospheric global warming. It's been about 75 years since the theory was proven. And it's been about 50 years since we started paying attention. And for those 50 years, I think, I get frustrated and angry because the message is aimed at you and me, that we need to do something about this, reduce, reuse, recycle. When the reality is, it's the business world that is responsible for this. We know through research that about 100 companies are responsible for 71% of our global emissions. Why are we not putting the attention on them? Why is it up to you and me to make these changes? So if we focus on business and industry, but we also have to work with government and work with education. And I feel like we're only doing the minimum at this point. And so that leads me to feel frustrated and angry.
Thank you for sharing that. That is so appreciated, and so both of you, the feelings you've spoken about are definitely shared. So Andrew, curious to hear, how do you feel about the climate crisis?
It's a good question. First of all, thank you for having me. I find being, so I work mainly on the corporate side of the sustainability discussion, but it bridges into every other realm. How do consumers act? How do governments act? And so I think working in this field is a very mixed bag. I think if you're in the climate field at all and you're aware of the science and you're paying attention, you can't avoid being scared. Scared for my kids, scared for us as I get older, and frankly saddened, because we have to be really honest about this. Some of the effects of climate are already locked in, right? We're already seeing some of it. I was born in South Florida. I think the odds that coast looks like it does now in 50 years is almost zero. I mean, I haven't talked to any scientists who think Miami's really going to make it, unless something really dramatic changes in the next 5 to 10 years in how fast we decarbonize and can take carbon out of the atmosphere. But at the same time, there's things that are hopeful. I mean, in the business community, the idea that sustainability is on the agenda and climate change is a problem, like, we won that battle. It's on everybody's agenda. The world's largest companies all have something to say about it. They're not big enough goals. Not enough of them have kind of science-based targets, but it's growing really fast just in the last few months, and especially in the last couple of years. And the technology's gotten so much cheaper. I think everything about the clean economy has been shocking, even to people who were paying attention 10 years ago. So it's hard not to be hopeful. Like, I know we will get to a clean grid, and we will get to a place where pretty much everybody has an electric vehicle and everything's plugged in. So we're going to get there, but we started too late. So I find it just a constant tug on my kind of system, just my mood about feeling both a realistic kind of sadness. I think some people have said in this field we should grieve. I think there's some grief that needs to happen about the things that we will lose and we're starting to lose. But I think we're finally moving right in the right direction. And even in the business community, which could have been the laggard, I think is leading in some places, versus some governments, obviously. So, it's hard to, there's no one word for how you feel about climate. It's kind of everything. I don't know if you guys saw the cover of Time. I don't have it somewhere this week, is Climate is Everything. It's good to see media finally kind of getting that, that it's in everything. So that's a long version of saying, I don't know how I feel, I think.
I had such a different reaction to the Time. I thought, oh no, Time magazine is doing a better job than some curriculum designers at really prestigious private social justice oriented liberal arts universities. Okay, so I saw what Time was doing and I thought, well, that's beyond most of what happens in most business classes from my experience. So what does that say about higher education's failure to take on reality in this way? So I really appreciate the fact that you are sharing your feelings, and I do believe that we try to address in Turn Week the idea that grief is a cycle, and there's all the emotions that you would have, including denial at the beginning, and then going into all those other emotions are real, and we dip back into them sometimes, even if we've made it through that cycle many times before, to acceptance and action, which is what the three of you are all in. But it doesn't mean you can't go back once in a while and be a little angry or a little sad or a little frustrated. That's absolutely normal. And I just want everyone on the call to understand that we do have to speak about our feelings in order to be real and not sweep things under the rug. So what do you do? Let's each name one thing that we do to help us cope. Besides deep breathing exercises, or maybe that's it, huh? So something that you do to cope, because this is a lot to bear when you have the knowledge and when you're not in denial. There can be a toll. So I'm just curious, what do you do personally to just kind of de-stress and share those ideas? So Nancy?
So I would say my focus is just staying on what is within my realm of control. So that's my home life, my lifestyle, educating my children, and it's also then my professional life, educating my students and trying to collaborate with others who are like-minded. So just staying within my realm of control, because it's far more than I alone can do.
Beautiful answer. Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, there's the personal stuff. I found meditation over the last 3-4 years, kind of made that a daily practice. I think it's really necessary, especially after the 2016 election. There's a big load off having people moving in the right direction in the US government now, but it was exhausting 4 years, not just on climate, obviously, but on, everything I value. There's also just kind of trying to live your values as much as you can. I mean, it's hard. Before the pandemic, I traveled the world to spread the message of what I do and had a huge footprint. I've kind of enjoyed having a much, much smaller footprint the last year, but it's, I've made choices to be vegetarian the last 25 years, and I try to eat as many vegan meals as I can kind of get away with a family that has varied tastes. But I think there's also just the need, like there's kind of mini groups of people that, have kind of called together Zoom meetings over the last few years in my field, kind of the people that are really in the same place as I am, that really understand deeply what's going on and have to kind of fight the battle constantly to convince people to take it as seriously. So sometimes it's just spending a little time with people who get it, so you're not having to kind of expend any energy, and it's not just to sit around and like whine, but actually to whine. I mean, there's that part, we drink, but just to kind of be talking about what it's, these kinds of questions and be able to. So I've had some kind of consistent email or Zoom or chat groups with colleagues. I have found that to be helpful.
Thank you. Great. And Pam?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of coping tools earlier when you first asked me about what my feelings are, because they go hand in hand. So I'd say in addition to prayer and exercising, walking, biking, EVing, being on calls like this, definitely my job. I say the Climate Reality Project was really a fabulous experience. I took that training back in 2015, and it's definitely not a group of people just like me who support businesses and grad students, but it's people from every walk of life coming together to learn how to talk about the climate crisis. I think that that's key. The other thing I do is I try to figure out what are my own skills. For whatever reason, I'm good at talking with business executives. So it's maximizing my opportunities to do that, coaching others and how to do it, dispelling that it's not such a mystery, it's not that hard, but coaching others and doing the same. And when I decided to write my book, Leading Green, Profit for Your Workplace and the Environment, I felt that I can do everything I can to convince all my friends and family members, not that it's always easy, to also be a vegetarian and drive an EV and leave the car at home as much as possible, not fly as much. But I felt that if I could convince as many corporations to do so, that would be a really wide range of impact. And not only the company's activities, as Nancy was saying, but also each individual employee has friends or family. So I cope with it that way. And I realize I never have to retire. I can always do this work. And I'm drawn to do this work forever because it's what we each need to do. And I want to do it. So those are some of my coping skills for realizing I can apply my skills to this.
Let me just throw in there, I kind of wish we could all retire, meaning I think like the chief sustainability officers in companies, the ones who really get it, they know that their job in a way is to make their job irrelevant. I mean, that's the ideal, right? Is that we shouldn't be out there having to pitch companies or organizations to create sustainable net positive organizations. It should just be the way we do things. I don't think when I started this 20 years ago, I don't know where I thought we'd be at this point, but I think I thought we'd be further in many ways and not having some of the same conversations that we've had for a long time. So I think we're accelerating now for sure, but it took a while.
Right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. We're going to move in a moment to about 10 minutes for each panelist to talk about their work and share with us about their work. But I just want to make two quick notes. Harriet Harvey Horn is in the house. And when she is, that means that the head of the co-head of Climate Reality in the Bay Area chapter, all of San Francisco, is in the house. And so we have a lot of Climate Reality trained people on the call here, and we highly recommend that. And I'm sure she'll put a link in the chat at some point. And also, Nikki Santos has put a link to the Ignatian Solidarity call for the Catholic Environmental Justice Challenge. So that's a really great thing to look into as well for people that just really want to expand that network, stay healthy and grounded with people that get it while you're working with people that don't get it. So I'd like to then sort of start with Nancy, who's really primarily in the context of academia and also does a lot of other things. She's really networked within that and has done outstanding things at Loyola University, Chicago, as a person who's situated in business and environmental studies. That is quite a dance. And those tracks are not near each other. So she's kind of in an extended leap all the time, I'm sure. But I'd love to hear about Nancy's work a little bit. And then I think we'll go to Pam's and then we'll go to Andrew's. Okay.
All right, thank you. Indeed, my appointment here at Loyola is a joint appointment between the School of Environmental Sustainability and the School of Business. I am a business professor, but my expertise is in sustainable business. So this is why I have the joint appointment. So my work over the time I've been at Loyola has really just been an extension of my career, continuing my path and doing what I've been doing. I started out as a children's therapist, and I was promoted into management of nonprofit organizations. I didn't know anything about running a business, a nonprofit, so I went to get my MBA, which is where I learned about corporate social responsibility. And it spoke to me, it resonated with me that businesses really need to step up and do something better. They have to quit just focusing on profit maximization. So instead of returning to the nonprofit field with my newfound business skills, I decided to stay in academia, get a PhD, and teach business students to be better future business leaders. I thought I could have a greater impact there. So this is where I've spent my entire career. So I teach sustainability to business students, how they can run a better business, a more responsible business. And of course, when I started 20 years ago, we were using words like corporate social responsibility. It's sort of morphed, and now I'm teaching sustainable business, but it's all the same message, that there is a better way to run a business. Some of the points that I've tried to get across in my career to all of my business students. The first one is that weak sustainability is insufficient. So sustainability actually falls along a continuum. On one end is very weak sustainability. On the other end is very strong sustainability. And the weak sustainability is focused on this business case for sustainability. It's going to improve their profits. It's going to decrease their costs. It's going to improve customer satisfaction, employee retention, open up new market share. So all of this is this business case. And in fact, from my own research, I've discovered that approximately 2/3 of businesses are there. That's what they're doing. And 2/3 of our business schools who are teaching sustainability in their business programs are taking that same orientation of weak sustainability. So what weak sustainability is teaching businesses, but also business students, our future business leaders, are just to make incremental changes, small changes, improve business as usual, make it better, but nothing too radical. Let's just continue on the path and keep getting better. Sort of a continuous improvement approach. But the problem is this was always intended to be an entry point, not a destination. And here we are all these years later, and businesses are still at this entry point of weak sustainability. And if they're always chasing the financial numbers, they will, instead of the scientific numbers, they'll never get where they need to be. So strong sustainability, on the other hand, is what I try to teach my students for my whole career. Strong sustainability is really about not the economics of sustainability, but the science. The ecological science, the climate science, trying to make my business students understand the environmental impacts of what they are doing and what we need to do to change that. So it's a much more significant transformational change instead of this incremental change. Learning to operate our businesses within planetary boundaries, following the science, as Andrew mentioned, the science-based targets for our greenhouse gas emissions. These are the steps we need to take, and we need to really focus on businesses taking responsibility and making these transformational changes, not you and me. The second point I try to teach my students is that we really need to get business and industry to step up. So they need to start doing these things. I already told you that the research shows that only 100 businesses are responsible for 71% of our global emissions. So it needs to be more science-based. Businesses need to understand the ecological science and the climate science, and instead of chasing the financial numbers for why they should implement sustainability. So they need to take more responsibility. And then the third point that I try to share with my students are the fact that we need to implement policy to really force change. As of right now, we all know that in the United States, sustainability is voluntary, and we've made such small progress and such little progress in 50 years. 50 years later, in my opinion, we're still doing the minimum. We need to enact sustainability legislation, get our policymakers on board. We need to vote so we can force change through legislation. So these are the three things that I've devoted my career toward and what I continue to do here at Loyola.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Wow, fantastic. Pam.
I'm glad I get to follow you, Nancy, because I see the Chicago skyline. I was born in Chicago, and I have so much to say that underscores the points you just made. So thank you. It's interesting to call it weak sustainability. I like that you're bold enough to call it that incrementalism. At Presidio Graduate School, we started in 2003 with sustainability in the core of every course. So if you think about the MBA curriculum, everything from accounting and finance to marketing, operations, supply chain, public-private partnerships, everything, we have sustainability in the center. And then in the past several years, we've said sustainability and social justice in the center. So I came to the school because of the sustainability side, and I'm just drinking from a fire hose on the social side. Finally. But what you said about policy also, we have an MPA program as well, a Masters of Public Administration for the public-private partnerships, and I just admire the work, for example, of the policymakers, Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and others who are doing so much in that area. And then back to incrementalism. One of the things I learned from one of the early chief sustainability officers, weren't called that at the time, is the 5 steps theory of, don't just take one step, skip ahead to the 5th step. I love that. I'm kind of an efficiency queen in my personality, and my husband would share that. But it's not only the efficiency, it's just that it makes good business. Why catch up to worst what your competitors are doing, at best to what your customers expect? No, go many steps to the future to what no one can imagine yet and make that successful. But that's what we need to do. So I might bring that weekend strong terminology back to my college. My work is, ever since I left college, I was in market research in the electronics industry. And then I joined the Institute of Management Consultants and realized that it's not just enough for me. It wasn't enough just to give over some great research about what the market needs, but to help the decision makers of the companies to actually interpret that research and make changes that better the company. So that's what I've been doing in supply chain and sustainability for 30 plus years. And my favorite part of my job is coaching coachable clients. And what I mean by that is some clients think they're already doing everything they can for sustainability, and they're doing a lot perhaps, or they're doing incrementalism, but they're not open to these 5 steps ahead. Others don't think they really need to do much at all except for report on sustainability, questionable results at that. And those clients likewise, I'm just being honest, are not fun for me to work with. The ones I love coaching are the ones who really get it, that they must be a leader in sustainability, and that are open to having the minds of our professors, our graduates, and sometimes even our grad students to help them. And it's remarkable. We have one client who's youngish, and she's commissioned several projects to Presidio Graduate School. We call our consultancy PGS Consults. And we get to see her rising in her career, where she now has the ear of the CEO, and it's one of the many rewarding aspects of this career. Before handing it over to Andrew, I just want to say that there was a question earlier in the previous panel about, is it necessary to have a degree in sustainability or in climate science in order to do good work on this? And I would say no, because there's probably many more examples of people who don't have that, who are doing amazing work than who are. I think about my colleague, Bill Weil, who's a scientific PhD and worked in the semiconductor industry at MIT, and he never knew he would become the climate czar at Google and then Facebook. Never knew, and now he's doing some great work on the policy side. So Climate Voice. But I would say that now that there are more programs available, and naturally, forgive me, I'm a little prejudiced about Presidio Graduate School just because it's built on sustainability from the start, that it's helpful. You have like-minded people, professors, you speak the same language, and you have enough experiential learning with all three of the types of clients I mentioned that you learn how to communicate and be effective. So definitely don't let it hold you back. We need every single person on this call and everyone who's going to see this video afterward. Definitely, we urgently invite you. And if this is something you see that you want to really do for the rest of your career in a big way, big swing way, why not avail yourself of more education this way? Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, it's great, easy to follow you guys because you covered a lot of, I think what I would say. I mean, I think we all agree on kind of where the business community is. So I'm not sure where to start. I mean, I'll just say that I got into this field just to connect to the kind of curriculum question. I came out of business school in '99, and a few years later, like 2 years later, had this kind of values check. I wasn't in sustainability at all. I just was a regular business guy, and had this values check, took this kind of right turn, went back to school for environmental management. And when I started to learn about sustainability and carbon, and I was really kind of angry that I had come out of 2 years at a top business school and had never heard those words. And this was back, in 2000, 2001. It even seemed silly then. Now it's like ludicrous. And I mean, I'm not paying close attention to curricula, but I talk to professors and I hear about this enough to know that Presidio is still not the rule, but the exception to make it part of every class, and that it's still mostly like electives or the second year stuff in most business schools when it needs to be part of everything. Like, I don't know how you take an operations class or a discussion on supply chains and not talk about carbon. I just, or human rights, or, so I think we have to integrate it. And that's just true of really everything we're talking about. So just to then kind of flip to my work is, I mean, fundamentally, my job is kind of a storyteller and trying to, professionally nudge companies to go faster. And I've spent, the last 20 years, in essence, writing about these issues, studying companies, working with them, speaking to them. And, my mission is really to inspire businesses to help the world thrive, to, solve the world's problems as the core of their business, and to do that profitably and to grow and profit because of it. So that it is, and that is, frankly, as aggressive as that sounds, that is, as you heard, the weak sustainability case. I mean, I'm incredibly tired of making the business case for sustainability. I mean, there's been plenty of pithy comments on that over the years, like Ray Anderson, the late great CEO of Interface, saying, what's the business case for destroying life on the planet? I mean, there's just a macro business case that is silly that we have to keep making. So, the story that I'm always telling through my writing and my talks is like, we've got these really big challenges. There's like these mega trends going on, and the grand challenges are climate, inequality, and biodiversity. I think those are the three that can kind of basically bring us down. And I, like you, Pam, was more about the environmental side and have come more and more into the social and the inequality, in part because they've gotten so much worse. And they're, the data on that in the US especially is just shocking. The last 30 years, the inequality problem has just, skyrocketed. So I talk to companies about these big, kind of knotty problems, the good news, the kind of things that are helping drive things like the clean economy I mentioned, the things that are helping make it easier, and the kind of ongoing pressures on business, which includes just increased transparency, data. Everybody's got a phone, everybody's an auditor, everybody's can take a picture of what your business is doing at any time. And then in particular, I think one of the most powerful forces I hear from businesses is the power of the younger workers. So the people on this call who are the young millennial to almost Gen Z, the pressure you can put on businesses is kind of profound. And so I think, yes, you can do things as personally, we talked about before, how you eat, all of that, but it's as you go into the world and even go interview at companies or government agencies or whatever, and ask them about their sustainability plans, this kind of gets spread around the organization. They know when they're getting these questions, and the young workers, I think, really change the culture of a company as they kind of feed into it. And so I think it's a really powerful opportunity for millennial and Gen Z to really drive this change much faster. And you're seeing that. You're seeing people speak out as employees about their companies. So, the story I'm telling is these pressures on business, and it fundamentally leads to the idea that the role of business in society is changing. And I'd argue there's probably been more change on that in the last 18 months than maybe the previous 20 years. The combination of the pandemic, the murder of George Floyd, the Me Too movement, the climate crisis becoming radically clear as the world burns, it just raised so much of what companies need to talk about now. The voting rights. I mean, I would not have guessed a couple of years ago companies would have to chime in on voting rights. And they're involved now in all of these issues. They have to be, and they're struggling with how to do it, what's the right way. But this is a good sign. I think as we get business more into the systematic change, and as Nancy said, if they start to work in a positive way with governments and we bring policy into bear, and then all of us as consumers, then you have all of the legs of what's needed to move the world and to get us to kind of a more thriving, sustainable place. Because it's my choice in work, I believe that business has to play this incredibly big role for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's the dominant form of organization in the world. It's the majority of jobs and capital flows, and it controls government in many ways, right? We have legalized corruption in the US. It's part of the way we do it. And then there's actual corruption around the world. So business just has ridiculous power and needs to use it now in the right direction. And that's the big kind of mission of my work is how do we get companies to be playing a positive role? So I'll leave it there. I think we want to take some questions, right?
Yeah, we will. As we're coming to the point where we can take questions in the chat, if you have a question for one of the speakers or all of the speakers, feel free to start formulating that or just thinking about it. But I just wanted to ask a little bit more on that, Andrew, in terms of what should a climate activist or an advocate really focus on business? And then that really can go across to Nancy and Pam as well. Like if you're going to dedicate yourself to this field, would business be a great focus for a person, going into a career?
I'll just take a cue from looking at the big environmental NGOs over the last 10, 15 years. They shifted really from trying to change policy to pushing business, right? I mean, all the major environmental NGOs have significant partnership work with companies. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think it's the recognition of the power of business, but, in some sense, a failure of governance at the government level, especially for the 4 years we were being run by climate deniers. Even with the Paris Climate Accord, governments aren't going fast enough. So I think the NGOs realized a while back that they could push and work with, Greenpeace both climbs buildings and works productively with companies, the same companies. Often they're protesting one aspect, they're working with them productively in another. And so I think if you want to change the world, you need to change business, but it all needs to change. You can go into government and be someone who understands sustainability and why policy has to drive that way. But I think these lines are getting so blurry now. The kind of partnerships we need and we're starting to see have all these players at the table, and you'll have NGO people sounding like business people and business people sounding like bleeding heart progressives. Like it's just, you get into these dialogues where when you get to the personal kind of stuff, like you started with, Kristen, you start to see people as people and you end up kind of having a much more real conversation in these groups. So I think you can play a role in many places. There's many ways to plug in, even if you're trying to change just business, you don't have to go try to be a sustainability person at a company. There's very few of those. You can just go work in the company and be someone who gets it and tries to bring it into your job. So look, we have, the bad news is we have a tremendous amount of work to do. The good news is we have a lot of work to do. And so there's a lot, you can do many, many things. We all need to be working on this.
That's right. The opportunities are from all angles. I agree. When I was growing up in Silicon Valley, in my, I have to say it, in my teens, in the 70s, I have to say, okay. So there were no catalytic converters on all of our cars. And the Valley was so smoggy that if you could see Mount Hamilton, all my brothers and I would be like, wow, look, there's Mount Hamilton. Oh my goodness. It was so rare. And I had a dream one night that I was walking along in this bush that was maybe just 7 feet ahead of me was obscured by smog. But then catalytic converters. So what was that? It just unbelievably cleaned up the air. It was policy, right? In California, you shall have catalytic converters on your car for end of pipe reduction. It was technology. Someone had to design the catalytic converter. It was supply chain and manufacturing who could all of a sudden ramp up quickly enough that there were enough that you could buy, and then people who installed them. So this is what capitalism should be. It should be regulated, and we should keep up our technology, our R&D. Someone wrote in the chat about, a startup company. Absolutely, we need you. So we need everyone. And for voting in people who are going to recognize the need for regulations to make a responsible capitalistic community, 100%.
Do any of you have something to say in terms of how students or faculty or staff at a school that isn't like Pam's could push? Where would you push from if you were 22 years old and you wanted your business school to quickly get up to speed and stop acting like there's nothing going wrong and stop ignoring the so-called elephant in the room, although elephants are wonderful to be in the room. What would your advice be for someone who's at the undergraduate level saying, you know what, my business school is not doing this? What should they do?
So I would like to comment on this. I am in a Jesuit business school, and there is an initiative underway to reimagine the business school curriculum, but it's not enough. We have to do the whole university. We have to do all students. We have to teach them about climate science, ecological science, and strong sustainability. So my advice to students would be there is power in numbers. Students have a lot of voice at the university. So I would go organize with groups. Don't just go to your dean or your chair alone. Organize with groups. For example, are you a member of a student organization that could support this, and that you would speak to your dean as a group? Perhaps you have a net impact chapter or something else at your school, an environmental student club. And even more powerful than a group of students in an organization and a club would be going directly to your student government and seeing if you can get their support to address people even higher than your dean. So there's power in numbers. Students have strong voice. Use it.
Thank you.
I just say, I've talked about it already, but I think if you're asking, like in every class, if you ask during a case study or whatever, how does that relate to carbon, or what happens with sustainability? You just bring the perspective. The professors have to start answering it. They have to start being ready, right? And I think, not being shy, going into the dean, talk to the administration about the curriculum and whether it's really meeting the needs of. It's not just the topic of sustainability. It's really the skill set that we need going forward, which is really being able to partner and collaborate is the crux of what's going to happen going forward, but just system thinking. And we don't really teach that at any level of school. I'm watching my kids go through high school in very traditional ways, take an AP class, take the test, apply to college. It's not integrated. It's not, let's take a problem and look at it across, multiple dimensions, which is what real life looks like. So I think it's just also the way we teach, or the things that we're teaching. I think we're going to need to have people who are really flexible. The world's moving really, really fast, and able to learn quickly. These are the kind of skills I would hope that, my kids develop as they head out into the world. And they'll have to develop it maybe themselves. I don't think school is really doing that.
But I think to address another angle of the previous question of how to get all schools to embed sustainability in it, is the K-12 area. So we were speaking of a freshman, right? I didn't understand a year ago why our graduate school, we don't even have we're only graduate school, why we would develop this course that we developed on teaching K-12 teachers how to teach about climate, the climate crisis. I'm like, why are we doing that? I'm still trying to figure out why we're doing it. I'm happy, but maybe from this conversation, maybe that's what's going to really force all colleges to focus on climate and other aspects of sustainability and social justice. If the teachers at K-12 are able to teach it well, then naturally when the students matriculate up to college, they're going to expect even more of that. So maybe that is a kind of a grassroots way of doing it.
I do think we're kind of at a jam here where the students that are in college haven't had, for the most part, haven't had a K through 12 education that prepared them for the climate crisis or that taught them about disinformation as a way of looking, at critical literacy. Wasn't taught. It was taught, to analyze a text, but not a text that's trying to bring you down and keep you in the dark. So people can analyze text. They've had some good critical work in high school that they bring into the college level, but they're not used to texts that come from a giant think tank whose sole purpose is to obscure truth and deflate science. And many of the textbooks our students had in K through 12 are products of those think tanks providing curriculum materials to low-income schools that have science chapters in them called the climate debate. So we have this very large organized mechanism by which we're many, especially poorer areas, get these curriculum materials that then set up the future citizen or future voter to think there's a debate, which there is not. So that is, you spend 4 years in college undoing that, and by the time they graduate, you've maybe undone that, but they haven't had time then to really study all the science, and because they've been too busy getting out from underneath the disinformation. And I feel like that would be highly educational for people, at least in middle school and high school, to be realizing that these things exist without ruining their childhood. Because I'm a mom too, and I don't, you don't want to do this to your 8-year-old, but at some point, bringing people into that. But I just want to wrap up by thanking the panelists and also acknowledging all the students that are here today. This is a really remarkable hour to share together, and I hope that you take away from it a sense of collective power and commitment, and we used to call it mettle. Look it up if you don't know what it is. We need to really improve our mettle. So look that up, METTLE. We're leaning into the climate crisis. We're owning it. We're looking it straight in the eye, and we're not averting our gaze. And that's what we have to do intergenerationally. Everyone alive today that has any capacity needs to lean into this. We can't wait for the kindergartners to have those correct textbooks. It has to happen this decade. We have such an opportunity to shape the future, and not to sound too messianic, which could be my tendency given my birthday. But we do have this power to shape the future and make the world better. We can turn down this curve, but we have to be very vocal in support of people changing. And we need to realize that the majority of people agree with us. They're just silent. And we're maybe the minority that's willing to say it. Keep saying it, say it louder, say it 5 times better, get 5 steps ahead of everyone. Keep talking, keep pushing. Students, tons of power. Withhold your checks. No, I didn't say that. And go in and really talk to the highest ups you can get to, and all the faculty too, and drive that change. I'm not putting it on your shoulders. I don't want to dump anything on you. That's not fair. I'm putting it on mine just as much. But let's do that, because the silent majority will eventually see that it's cool to care this much. It's cool to get emotional. It's cool for Iman to tell us on some level he's terrified now that he knows what's going on. That's cool. right? And we need to make that socially acceptable to have this space and open up these dialogues and read Andrew's work, right? Look at Nancy's research, right? Get to know Pam's curriculum. If you're going to grad school in business, you want to be in San Francisco, this is the woman to talk to, okay? So I thank you all for being here. Thank you, Nikki, for coming in from Creighton. It's so wonderful to see you. You've been such a great support and friend